Hi, my name's Jill Kraus, and this is my husband, Peter. We're here to celebrate the announcement of the Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice. The new initiative is inspired by Peter's grandparents, Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus, and their journey to Austria and Germany in April of 1939 to rescue the largest group of unaccompanied minors brought to the United States leading up to World War II. The Krauses were an ordinary couple. Living in Philadelphia, Gilbert Kraus was a labor lawyer who had his own law practice. He was also the publisher of the Philadelphia Ledger. In late 1939, Gilbert and Eleanor were approached by the leaders of a local organization called Brit Shalom. They were concerned about the plight of Jewish children in Germany. Using his legal background, Gilbert devised a way to utilize dead visas to allow children to migrate to the United States. Relying on their personal ingenuity and tenacity, they followed their conscience and against all odds rescued 50 children imperiled by the Nazis in the run-up to World War II. Had the war not started shortly after the group arrived in New York, many more might have been saved. We were unaware of this incredible legacy until 15 years ago, when Peter's father sent us a manuscript, written by his mother, Eleanor, Peter's grandmother. The mission was likely kept secret due to the intense anti-Semitism in America during the 1930s, and the fear that publicity could endanger both the children and future Jews who looked to immigrate to the United States. Leaders of the Philadelphia Jewish community actually advised Peter's grandparents against going and threatened to ruin their business if they did. Peter's grandparents chose to move forward regardless because to them, this situation simply could not be overlooked. They went into the heart of Nazi Germany in the spring of 1939, traveled from Berlin to Vienna, interviewed the children and their families, and traveled back to Berlin with the children, successfully gained permission to bring the children to the U.S. Perhaps the most poignant moment in the story is the description of Eleanor at the departure of the children by train from Vienna to Berlin. Jews were not permitted to raise their arms, as this could be seen as the Nazi salute, which they were not permitted to do. As a consequence, the parents of the children all gathered on the train platform with their hands at their side and wished their children goodbye without being able to wave to them. The moment Eleanor described was heartbreaking.
Well, I gave her the hard part. When we discovered the story, we took a trip to Austria and Germany ourselves to follow in their footsteps. There we discovered 600 questionnaires that were submitted by the parents of all the children who were interviewed to come to the United States, of which only 50 were selected. In Berlin, we visited the synagogue where the kids stayed while their visas to America were processed. It was an emotional experience, and it still stays with us, and it inspired us to take some action on our own. My grandparents saw a need during an unstable time to bring endangered children to the safety of the United States. And they had to overcome barriers that severely restricted immigration. 80 years later, we're still facing the same barriers, restrictions, and consequences in regards to immigrants and refugees. I'm sure this will happen again in the future, but it cannot deter us from doing what is right. Like so many others, Jill and I find this incredibly difficult to understand. As the United States, the country we're all a part of, was founded as a place for emigrating people to start a new life, and it has made us all the better for it. But the idea of keeping this embedded in our roots has been interrupted throughout history, and we feel a responsibility to do our small part to help the United States push past this anti-immigration sentiment and terrible xenophobia. That is what this initiative intends to do. The Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Immigrant and Refugee Justice will have a strong impact on advocacy around public policy, legislation, and the rights of undocumented immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and their families. And we will provide support to help the URJ congregations and youth programs promote immigrant rights in their communities. More specifically, the initiative will activate and train Reformed Jews to impact public policy on federal, state, provincial, and local levels. Educate the public and communicate the current issues. Provide micro-grants to congregations and youth programs to act and to advocate. Further expand the work of Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism, which has long held the movement's immigrant and refugee justice efforts. We hope that this story and the emotion that's connected to it serves as an inspiration to you and to others. Each of you have incredible power as individuals. Don't forget that. Gilbert and Eleanor did not. They were faced with unimaginable resistance as they took action in a much more difficult world, but still chose to stand up for what was right to improve their world and our world. Today's immigration and refugee crisis can seem overwhelming, and at times I'm sure it is. But we can all commit to being part of an improving process and of helping our country find an answer that lives up to the legacy as an open and inclusive nation. Thank you, everybody.